Good morning, our viewers. Welcome to the Council for Strategic Affairs platform. Today is Friday, September 6, 2024. It is 6 a.m. Eastern Daytime in US, and it is 3:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Welcome to the 29th episode of Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee. And we have an important guest, a distinguished diplomat and a media personality who post-retirement has been very active in the journalism field, in the field of higher education, and also in the field of national security. The guest today we have is Ambassador TP Sreenivasan, who, after a distinguished career spanning over 37 years in Indian Foreign Services, having served in United States for 3 separate rotations, having been ambassador to other countries, having represented India in UN missions, Conference on Disarmament, has been very active. Very recently, on his 80th birthday, he published a book called Diplomacy Liberated. Actually, it is not a newly written book. It's an anthology of wisdom that he has imparted on the younger generation over a span of almost 20 years post-retirement. He has been so active that he has written at least 1,500 journalistic pieces, and one of his PhD mentee, PhD scholar, S. Gokul, and a retired Air Force officer, Wing Commander Raga Shirinaya, went through those lists of 1,500 articles and selected actually 100 of them, and it came published as in the form of a book. So the wisdom has been memorialized in the form of a book, like an anthology of poems, in this book called Diplomacy Liberated. It's been published by Konak Publishers Private Limited in New Delhi. It's a fairly thick book, having at least 457 pages. And I'll recommend our viewers, they get an opportunity, they must read it. The important thing is that it gives you historical perspective to various problems that were contemporary at that point in time. So there's no revisionism in there. These articles were written there and then based on the contemporary knowledge in which Ambassador Sreenivasan gave his viewpoint. So rather than saying diplomacy liberated, I will say that we are having a conversation with Ambassador TP Sreenivasan on lessons learned in diplomacy or lessons in diplomacy. Welcome, Ambassador Sreenivasan, to the CSA platform. We are indeed very pleased to have you on our platform. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adityanjee. I've been following you for quite some time. And when you say I am active, then what do I call you? You are so active and so, have a worldwide audience. And I consider it a great honor that you decided to have me on your show. I have a regular weekly show on what's called AsiaNet in Kerala's largest television channel, oldest television channel, where I do contemporary international relations discussions of a format. But now I'm on the other side. I'm now going to be asked questions. Normally I do ask the question. So it's a role reversal in a sense. But I'm glad to do that because writing a book is easier than promoting it. You must have experienced that yourself. And so your help in promoting my book is very much appreciated because it's very difficult to reach an audience, right audience, when you write these books. And it's just left to fend for itself normally. But there's a great opportunity for me to explain why book and what I wanted to do in this. And this thought came to me from a very eminent journalist, Mr. B.G. Varghese. He's passed now. His autobiography is called First Draft of History. So, and he asked me to launch it in Kochi, in Kerala. And I was talking to him, and I was fascinated by the name. These were actually his articles written over a period of time in the newspapers. So he said, newspaper writing and journalism is a first draft of history because all the history that will be written in the future will be depending on these writings of various people. And we should not lose them. We must keep them and for posterity. So this is how the idea came about. As you rightly explained, I had written more than 1,500 essays in 20 years. And we selected because it was my 80th birthday. So my friends whom you mentioned, that is Gokul and Ragashri, I left the choice to them because they are younger people who might be able to have a better idea of what is to be selected. And that is how this book originated. And of course, I have a publisher who has done more than half a dozen of my books, Mr. K.P.R. Nair. This is my 11th book, but at least 6, 7 of them are published by him. So he took on this responsibility and he has produced a very presentable book I'm very happy about. So as I said, this reflects the multifarious responsibilities I had as a diplomat, starting from Japan, going to Bhutan, from there to Moscow, Moscow to New York to Myanmar, Burma, then as first as ambassador to Fiji and other 8 South Pacific states, then back to Delhi, and then to Kenya, then back to Washington, and then finally at the Atomic Energy Commission in Vienna. So it's a very varied kind of career we had. Every Foreign Service officer has a different kind of a combination. Nobody has an identical experience. But as it happened, I did more of multilateral rather than bilateral diplomacy. Because most of my postings were in UN stations, in New York, of course, then Geneva, then Vienna, and Nairobi. These are the 4 UN headquarters, as we call it. So I have done 3 as ambassador, and Geneva, I have been there many times for various negotiations. So I'm basically considered a multilateralist in the Foreign Service. And I probably have the longest kind of experience in multilateral diplomacy. And that's why my topics are very, very various of varieties, because if you're an ambassador in a single country, you are focused on that. Like I was in Kenya or I was in Fiji. But in Vienna, in Nairobi, etc., are also UN capitals. So that's why you will find a kind of material on the UN negotiations and so on. And UN negotiations have particular value. And users of the products of the UN, like the conventions, the resolutions, all these analyze these documents after they are done. And therefore, they really do not have a view of how it was done. Take just one famous treaty called Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. everybody analyzes it, but it has a long story which is very, very significant. How it went through various stages, and what you see today is only the tip of the iceberg. So much has been done below, and that is how these come. And so, ambassadors or diplomats who have participated in the negotiations can give a perspective which may not be available to historians and practicing diplomats all the time. And that's why there are now ambassador professors, a new category just come about from United States. And now I am called an ambassador professor in the Somaiya Vidya Vihar University in Mumbai, where I also teach. So this is the background of it. And it is classified into different sections, which will give you an idea as to and sections, and you'll be able to see the different sections that we have. One is, of course, United States, where I spent a lot of my time. Then multilateralism, as I said, my interest in the United Nations. Then China, because any Indian diplomat has to be concerned and known about China. Cuba, because it was my second home, as it were, when Cuba was the chairman of the non-aligned movement. And from New York, I used to go very often to Havana. Japan was my first posting, and my language is Japanese. Still, I remember a bit of it. Then South Asia, naturally, everybody is concerned. Then Ukraine, which is, of course, the latest aspects of it. Then nuclear disarmament, on which I have done a lot of work in the first committee of the United Nations, as well as in the IAEA. So a lot of things relating to the IAEA, nuclear energy or nuclear tests, and also the great controversy we had with the United States from 1998 to 2000 after our nuclear tests and the famous Jaswant Singh Talbot talks and so on, in which I participated. Then on the Indian Foreign Service, I had written a few pieces. Some of them are of lasting value. In environment, I happened to be the vice chairman of the first COP, which was held in Bonn after the Rio conference in 1992, which gave us a lot of hopes about environment, but it started crashing after COP1. And I was also at the COP28 in Dubai. So it's a long time, and I haven't attended all of them, but I have attended quite a few of them, and I know the story, because what happens is many efforts have been made, but the net result of the environment negotiations is that we have not made any progress, because the climate change is going at 3.5% Celsius, and it has to be brought down to 1.5 degrees Celsius for humanity to survive. And unfortunately, we have not reached any kind of agreement on this. And my conclusion is that we need to find a technological rather than a political answer. Because if technology can develop in such a way that we can go and capture the carbon in the atmosphere and bury in the land or something like that, it's a far-fetched thing. Other than that, politically, I do not think, because the basic reason is nobody is willing to change their lifestyles. Our demand is developed countries must change their lifestyle, bring their consumerism down. And they say, no, we have come through this various stages and we need to enjoy the fruits of it now. So it's not reconcilable. Then Indian diaspora happened that many of the stations I worked with, like in Fiji, was a major diaspora situation, and I had to face a military coup there. And I was there 2 years as an ambassador who does not recognize the government. Have you ever heard of that in history? Mr. Rajiv Gandhi said, you don't have to recognize this government, it's a military government. So when I told him that I don't think I'll last here very long, because which government is going to tolerate an ambassador for more than 24 hours if you do not recognize the government? But because of our position as a majority community in Fiji. They tolerated me for 2 full years. And then finally they gave me 48 years to live. 48 days.
hours. So they gave you
Okay.
PNG status?
Sorry.
Did they declare you PNG, persona non grata?
Yes, of course. Of course. And they gave me 72 hours, but I left in 48 hours saying I'd like to come as a tourist for 24 hours much later. As it happened, that prediction came true. After democracy was restored 15 years later, the coup leader who ordered me out
Sipiveni
invited
Rabuka.
me back. Rabuka.
Sipiveni
He
Rabuka.
invited me back and thanked me for doing a service to Fiji by bringing democracy back. And he is now the Prime Minister of Fiji, as you may know, the coup leader of 1987. So that is covered. Then higher education was I'm an accidental educationist because when I came back from my foreign service, the Chief Minister of Kerala thought that I might have a global outlook on education. And he was looking for somebody who could modernize education in Kerala. And so, without any experience except as a teacher for 1 year in a university, I was entrusted with higher education Kerala. I did a lot of work, of course, with many colleagues, but the left to all those, they called me an American agent, and they even physically attacked me at a conference. And so those recommendations still remain on the books. But happy situation is that the present government, which is the same government, with same party which opposed me at that time, are now saying what bringing back, like private universities, foreign universities, liberal education, etc. So it's a matter of satisfaction that some of it is coming. And then some miscellaneous things of interest, the Middle East conflict, fashion and politics, and then some personal memoirs, which I happened to write for somebody or the other who asked for it, like college chronicles, settling down as a diplomat, then Ayurvedic experience, then noble moments. I went to Stockholm, and a tribute to my wife who just passed away in 1923. And that is how I conclude because I couldn't write any more after that. And this is the bird's eye view of the book. So perhaps we can discuss any of these or and bring out some more ideas.
So, first
for our
of
viewers.
all, our deep condolences to you for your personal loss, because this book was the brainchild of your late wife, who had suggested that on your 80th birthday, such an anthology should come. So, our deepest personal condolences for the loss of your soulmate. But going through the book, it has been fascinating for me. I would say that I have not read all the 400 pages or 357 pages, but I have focused on relevant chapters. And as I was saying, that this book actually chronicalizes the contemporary international relations history, because these pieces have been written in different periods of time. And some of them have relevance as we are talking about things in 2024. So there are 3 pieces on Ukraine, and that is a topic of contemporary discussion. While India has played its cards very well internationally, and people are coming around to appreciate India's posture, India's thinking, going through these 3 chapters, I came with a feeling that you were saying that India should have come on the side of democracy in the beginning. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But we
Now
have come
that
to
puts,
no.
yeah, our role has been appreciated, but
Right.
I have a level of discomfort as we look at things now. So the question is Ukraine a democracy?
Not. Of course, they have elections, yes. But don't forget that was part of the Soviet Union. I visited Ukraine with Mrs. Gandhi when it was part of the Soviet Union.
It was part of Soviet Union. The last election was held in May of 2019.
Right.
The election should have been held in May of 2024. However scorn we may inflict on Vladimir Putin, at least he went through sham elections in March. Here is a person, leader of a so-called democracy, who refuses to hold elections, who has fired all the cabinet ministers, including the foreign minister, as we speak, and appointing his own factotums. And actually, his designation is Chief Martial Law Administrator, CMLA.
And also Commander-in-Chief.
Yes.
Was leading a battle. Yes.
And he wears battle fatigues.
Yes.
So this whole charade that it is fight between democracy and dictatorship or authoritarianism is a sham propaganda. What do you have to say on that?
Yes, it is absolutely true. But on the other side also, there is not much of a democracy as far as Putin is concerned either. So in this,
we agreed that we can heap scorn on Vladimir Putin for Russia's lack of internal democracy. There's no democracy in Russia. You know that it's stage managed.
So either of them, they're in the same system. In fact, the problem was that the Ukrainian authorities or whoever was in authority were not listening to Putin. That was the basic differences started from there. You know, the Crimea story and so on. And so I don't know whether he intended to conquer Ukraine, but he started off with this idea that Ukraine should be subservient to Soviet Union and not being part of NATO or the European Union. That was his basic interest. But once you start a war, the goalposts keep changing. And at one point, he said he wants to bring the Russian Empire back. And Lenin and Stalin were all wrong to have created the Soviet Union. So we do not know what exactly is his agreement. But so it's a question of survival.
There are also 2 points I will bring. One is that Putin, the so-called authoritarian, is here. And he is here because the international community failed to rescue nascent Russian democracy when Boris Yeltsin sent tanks to attack Russian Duma. So the genesis of Russia's lack of democracy following dissolution of Soviet Union lay entirely with the countries, the democratic countries that mattered, because they had a wink, nod situation with Boris Yeltsin, who was very well known to international agencies as an alcoholic. And it suited the Western hegemony to continue to expand NATO. And all the actions of Boris Yeltsin were forgiven, including his firing of prime ministers, every 3 months bringing another prime minister who will promise not to prosecute him post-retirement, abolishing the post of vice president. So the original sin lies with the Western democracies in not fostering the democracy when it mattered in Russia.
True.
Now coming to
that, and that is really the origin of the whole problem. What we see is somewhat different. The priorities have changed, but exactly this was the situation that NATO wanted to stay on. When Why was not NATO not abandoned? So what was NATO's role? And now NATO has found a role to save democracy in Russia, turn them around.
So coming back to Ukraine story, we also had a situation in Ukraine that a democratically elected president, by all standards, it was a democratic election. This candidate,
He was a comedian. And he contested.
talking about Viktor Yanukovych, he participated in every democratic elections. He did not succeed initially in 2 or 3 contests. Eventually, he came to power democratically. And then the
But he challenged Russia. Absolutely.
He was toppled, just like we see toppling of Sheikh Hasina, a democratically elected prime minister in Bangladesh. So when we talk about democracy, we forget about these things, that Ukraine was not an angel democracy even in 2014. There were influences, there were external diplomats who were channeling monies to bring about public uprising to topple a democratically elected president.
Right.
So I guess in the hindsight, India's even-handedness, balancing her own interests, was correct. And if historically we see how Ukraine has treated India, there's no warmth for Ukraine as far as India's civil society is concerned. Ukraine historically has been very, very hostile to India, has been selling tanks, has been selling engines of aircrafts, other ammunition to Pakistan. Ukraine was one of the countries that severely criticized India after Pokhran II. On all the international fora, Ukraine took anti-India postures.
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. So for anyone to say that India did not...
Dr. Adityanjee, the worst part about Soviet war against Ukraine, as a multilateralist, I would say, for a permanent member to invade another member of the United Nations, because these 5 countries were given the veto because they were going to be responsible for international peace and security. So how can a permanent member invade another member of the United Nations? There the UN collapses.
I think that shows a bankruptcy.
Israel also, the US is using its veto all the time to protect a member state who is invading a country which was established by the United Nations. So this is the big issue that we are facing today.
I think that is true, but having said that, pretty much at least 4 out of 5 permanent members have invaded other countries or territories that do not actually officially belong to them. I don't have to tell you the history. Even UK, the role they played in Falkland War or the Malvinas Islands, China's taking over territory or maritime domains from other countries. So we have pretty much all 5 of them.
Nothing was outright invasion. Those were all, I would say, comparatively minor issues. They were trying to readjust their interests, etc. But for a country to invade a permanent member to invade another country and then use the veto continuously to protect themselves, and that is a new threat to multilateralism.
I do not have any holds for Vladimir Putin. The person is suffering from what I would term megalomania. He is a hyper Russian, hyper nationalist.
And he was a KGB agent.
Yeah, he was a KGB agent. And I think he must be now ruining the day that he made that ill-fated decision, because he has landed the country into quagmire. The war is not a victory, outright victory. There are costs to Russia. But on the other hand, you have Volodymyr, who has got his country destroyed, could have played his hand more deftly rather than, not willing to negotiate about NATO's entry, and maintained a neutral facade that would have avoided the invasion. But that is past the thing. We want to move to the next subject, which is your involvement in the, nuclear issue. There were 10, 11 chapters you had talked about. And, the NPT, which we know all the deficiencies, the CTBT and Pokhran 2.
Pokhran 2 was the most important and most difficult situation that we faced because I was in Washington sitting there.
Oh,
You can imagine. Clinton said, I shall come down on these guys like a ton of bricks, he said. And that's what he did. Imagine that sanctions that he imposed. He himself had no idea what that sanction was. I thought at one point that 3 million Indians will be sent out of United States. That's what it looked like because those sanctions, the so-called amendment, was not defined. So anything could happen, and he imposed that kind of sanction for the first time on a country. And that is because he did not know that this was happening. He was reassured by many Indian leaders that, the nuclear policy will not change. He, in fact, has sent an ambassador to Mr. Narasimha Rao, to visit right, asking him, you say you will review, will you make nuclear weapons? And Vajpayee had his Buddha smile. And the ambassador came back saying, oh, this man will not do any such thing. He's such a nice, nice prime minister. And this took place. And he was angry more because he did not know about it rather than the other issues. And 2 years we struggled, to bring back our relationship to a certain level of norms.
So the
That was a
story
tough
goes
time.
that Bill Clinton personally in bilateral meeting on the sides of UN General Assembly had met with Prime Minister Narasimha Rao.
Yeah, it's 93.
And had threatened Prime Minister Narasimha Rao that if India went with the nuclear explosion, there will be some consequences.
Yes.
Prime Minister Narasimha Rao went to his heavenly abode, keeping that conversation private. Do we have any idea what were the threats given by United States to India during that bilateral?
Well, that's not clear. I asked Mr. Narasimha Rao directly this question when he came back for some treatment. And I spent a lot of time with him in Washington. And he said, I would like to take this. This is what he told me. But he said, if India had kept the promise he had given to Clinton, then it would not have been necessary for us to explode a weapon. This is what he told me. So that agreement, what it is, he has never spelled it out. Some people say that it was a guarantee that we will never go nuclear. And in return for it, the United States, which later many other countries tried, Obama tried, of a global zero. That means nuclear weapon states will also abandon their weapons because it is a dream. Nobody is going to do that. So, but Mr. Narasimha Rao believed that he had extracted a kind of pledge from Mr. Clinton that he would move towards nuclear non-proliferation as it is stated for the NPT came, because NPT authorizes them to increase their nuclear arsenal. So Mr. Narasimha Rao felt that this could have been avoided. That's what he said. But actually what he did was he himself prepared for the Pokhran 2 tests. That was also brought out by the Americans. They had satellite pictures of Kalam and so on, moving around in Pokhran, and confronted Mr. Rao with those pictures at one point. So it's all the story, but the last words he told me was that I would not like to, reveal this, but I had found a solution. But that I think was an illusion, I believe.
Definitely an illusion, because if anything is not memorialized in form of an, reviewable agreement, Personal pledges remain personal pledges. The presidents come and go after 4 years. And
But we had evidence of that because after this 93 meeting, the next year General Assembly, I suggested to the Americans that please include something between the agreement between us. You know, a vague, at least some assurance that nuclear weapon states will move towards nuclear disarmament. And that was the understanding. They refused. They said, we don't know what you told, what my prime president told you, told your prime minister. But our brief is to say that American nuclear policy shall never change. So they didn't allow us even a reference to the meeting between Clinton and he said it's in a bilateral context, multilateral context, nothing has happened. This was my personal experience.
And even in bilateral context, unless something is memorialized, documented, yes, it didn't happen. You cannot go by verbal assurances.
Even where we have, treaties, etc. Americans are now, so Chinese are say they are all off, isn't it? He told Jaishankar that there are no such agreements in 88, 93, not even Panchsheel. So we have to start from the beginning. That's why he keeps saying we have no basis for a negotiation with China. So even that has happened. So even it is written and accepted by parliaments, etc., countries can go back on them. They are sovereign.
So I saw that, inconsistently in a number of pieces, you had taken a very positive viewpoint of India-US civil nuclear energy agreement.
Right.
But you at the same time said that the fruits could not come to fruition because of the civil liability law. Wasn't that a blessing in disguise?
Why?
I'm asking you.
No. See, I was in the
so your voice is
came from the
breaking.
No, when they introduced this in Parliament, that any compensation will have to be paid by the one who sells it, the seller rather than the buyer. That means the operator has no responsibility, only the originator has responsibility, which is against international law. But they forced it on the Parliament that this would be a good idea to do that. But I have a feeling that was meant by the party in the opposition at that time was BJP. They didn't like the Congress party getting all the credit, and they tried to put in a little bit of an issue there, thinking that the credit should not go entirely to the party. But the BJP finally came to some kind of agreement, even not on compensation. But Mr. Jaswant Singh gave many assurances, minimum deterrent, no tests, etc., not in so many words. And that is how the agreement was possible. But one interesting thing is an article that I wrote in 2017. That is when we were expecting that as a result of the nuclear agreement, Americans will in India. Even places were fixed. France was supposed to establish nuclear reactors in But I happened to be in Washington and I happened to meet an old friend. It's not clear? Okay, I'll speak louder. Okay, is it better now?
Better now? It's much better now. Yeah, it's much better now.
So what I'm saying is that I happened to meet a former senior official of the White House who told me that there will be no nuclear trade between India and the United States, which came as a big shock to me. That was the whole point of the nuclear deal, right? That they'll supply uranium, they'll supply material. We can sell our nuclear reactors. That so-called a free regime is what we expected. So then he explained to me, he said, we signed this agreement to enable you to cooperate with other countries. But United States will never be party to making India a nuclear weapon state. Because that's what will happen if we give you too many reactors and so on. Until today, after the only reactor we still have in India, foreign reactor, is the good old Kotankulam reactor. So, in a sense, the Americans use that compensation regulation to meet their original intention. So they didn't want to sell, and this came as a great blessing for them.
So on the other hand, if the civil liability law was not enacted by the parliament, and we had purchased 30, 40 years old reactors from the United States with all their deficiencies and repeated shutdowns and leakages, India would have been held sucking a lemon. So when I say that that was civil liability law was a blessing in disguise, that India did not have.
Is it for them or for us?
For us.
Is it?
For us. Because.
You mean you are not landed up with all these old reactors?
Yeah. I mean, Americans were very clear in their mind that their objective was to trap India into multilateral commitment, layers and layers of commitments, and not give anything in return. This is the behavior pattern. So they were just promising you the rose garden.
Absolutely.
And that never was meant to be. So at least we saved ourselves some trouble.
No, but of course it also demonstrated our determination in on this issue. It was a very difficult negotiations, as you may have followed it. But at very many occasions, our own nuclear, Atomic Energy Commission, etc., were not in favor of this. Very many times there was a difference of opinion between the Ministry of External Affairs and the Energy. And then finally, it had to be somehow, brought together, and that's how it was possible.
I think the hawks in India's civil society still hold the opinion that it was a mistake on our part because we gave too much and did not get any benefit in terms of concrete deliverables to India, whereas we, held our, we separated, we asked IAE to do inspections, the additional protocol, all those kind of things, commitments, and the moment you do
but we are able to buy material from other countries.
Yeah, openly.
We are able to import uranium from Kazakhstan.
Earlier also, but it was clandestinely, and now we are buying openly.
Exactly. Right. That is not a small number, actually.
Yeah. You also wrote a chapter on Iran's nuclear deal, the JCPOA. And you try to compare civil nuclear deal with India in 2005, culminating in 2008 with 2016 JCPOA. How do you compare and contrast both the deals?
Well, I used to sit next to the Iranian all the time in the IAEA. India, foreign ministers to ambassadors or third secretaries. I had an Iranian companion all the time while we are discussing nuclear issues. And they were very much appreciative of India's position secretly. They would never publicly say what India did was wrong or was right in not signing the NPT. But they really regretted their having signed the NPT, all this. And they were admiring us, the way in which we managed our nuclear policy without signing the NPT, with the sanctions facing us. And they were great admirers of us. And each time he would say, I wish we had not signed the NPT and tried these things like you did. So this was openly they used to tell me. So they realized that once you sign the NPT, you cannot get out of it. North Korea was trying to get out of NPT for many years. They have not been allowed to do so. So maybe they thought that that 15 years agreement that they reached, JCPO, might give them some leeway. But of course, President Trump came and removed that also. So that also became a futile exercise. But I think we have been more successful in managing the nuclear issue because of our position of not signing the NPT, not signing the CTPT, but at the same time being very constructive about non-proliferation.
I have this article of yours published on August 30th, 2016. It is Nuclear Deals Comparing Iran and Indo-US Agreements. And there's a specific line on page 201.
Okay.
And I'm going to read it aloud for you because I'm a little intrigued by what is written. And I will tell you my viewpoint, what you intended to say and what got published here.
Okay. All right.
The Iran deal marked a new beginning in the Iran-US relations, comma, while the Indian deal was a culmination of a process of rapprochement. Did you mean that rapprochement or you meant
Yes.
rapprochement?
I think it is rapprochement that is written there, isn't it? What is written there?
Rapprochement.
I think no. It is a rapprochement in the sense I must check that. But what happened was that before the nuclear deal, you may remember that you know then minister defense minister went to the United States and signed a huge deal in weapons, purchase of weapons. And that was more important in a sense of our rapprochement with the United States than even the nuclear deal, because they opened up their, arms. Of course, their interest was to sell arms to everybody. But this particular visit of the defense minister changed our, relationship, defense relationship with the United States. Do you know that none of us had ever entered the
Pentagon?
The defense Pentagon. Before that, the first time I went to the Pentagon only after 1998, after the tests. They wanted to show us the dangers of nuclear weapons and invited all of us for a one-day demonstration of what nuclear weapons can do to us. That was the first time I went into the Pentagon. Of course, there was some, kick lighter proposals, etc. were there. But there was really no conversation about defense matters. And this was 2 years before the nuclear agreement was debated. And therefore, as far as India-US is concerned, we had opened up the conventional trade even before the nuclear treaty was signed.
So again, I am still not sure whether it is India deal was a culmination of process of rapprochement versus rapprochement. There are similarly sounding but very different meanings.
Yeah, that was the mistake was made. And our editors did not notice it. Yeah.
I think you probably meant rapprochement because rapprochement is new. Rapprochement is reconciliation.
Even when you read it, I heard it like rapprochement.
So I was kind of intrigued, but it is what it is.
Okay.
Coming to the next topic, the foreign services. You wear a badge of honor, PNG status.
Yes.
Indian diplomats have, of course, faced a lot of harsh actions, and you have talked about them, including assassinations, not the one just in 1961. I believe in 1980s, Ravindra Mahatre in UK.
Mahatre. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, was killed by Pakistani terrorists in UK.
Yes, that was the first one ever.
And then, expulsion of Devyani Khobragade. All these incidents are there. Yes, these are parts of occupational hazards for a diplomat, just like, getting hurt or making the ultimate sacrifice as the occupational hazard for armed forces.
Absolutely.
Having said that, does the MEA support individuals and families adequately enough in these kind of situations? Because people are loyal citizens, loyal servants who have taken oath of secrecy to serve the government of India. Now, when we come out of these incidents, they become controversial. And my concern is welfare of the families and welfare of the individuals, their mental state when they go through these kind of ordeals.
No, but in the foreign service, there is no such feeling because we understand the risks. When I was attacked in Kenya in my own bedroom, that was the same night when Begin was assassinated in Israel. Imagine the security that the Israeli Prime Minister has and the security the Indian High Commissioner had in Kenya. You cannot compare. But Begin was killed. I just at least saved myself. So security, there is no absolute security anywhere. An amount of insecurity is there. And it is not practical for the government of India to have arrangements like we had it in Ottawa for a long time. You may know that. The ambassador, our High Commissioner cannot go anywhere without the Canadian Armed Forces. So that kind of situation we do not have anywhere else. No other government would have also given us that kind of protection. In Fiji, probably I should have been given. In Kenya, I would have been given. But I have never felt, that India has not been responsible for their defense. I don't have that feeling. But of course, from outside, one way or the other, they hurt. And compared to the representation that we have all around the world, we have got away rather mildly, I would say.
So this brings me to my next and last point. You did allude to your role as ambassador professor. So technically for as an ambassador professor, a hybrid category.
Right. Yeah.
Traditionally for international relations, we make a distinction between practitioners versus academics. But more and more this distinction is getting blurred. And besides you, there are other retired diplomats who have taken professorial academic positions in various universities. So we have this new category, which is practitioner turned into academic. And then very rarely an academic turned into practitioners. And there have been instances when people have been inducted into foreign service from academic backgrounds or have been used. Actually, that practice is much more common in some other countries, like United States, where there is a civil service component to foreign service, but academicians are always inducted if they have the domain expertise. We are having a lot of noise about lateral entry in contemporary India. What do you see the advantages of lateral entry into Indian foreign services?
No, you may have read that I am not particularly in favor of it.
I know that. I know that.
Basically, because it is the interest of the service, because we have certain expectations. Already, for a long time, we have had. In fact, till very recently, an IFS officer could not aspire to becoming an ambassador in Washington or London or even France or Russia. Lots of politicians were appointed. Mrs. Gandhi appointed a large number of them. The Foreign Service Association went to her and complained. Then she said, "Do you know, I have the authority to appoint 30% heads of missions from politics, but I have only appointed 3 or 4%. That's what she argued with us. She says, if you make a big show of it, I'll use my 30%. So she threatened us at that time, I remember. But now it is increasingly less. Now foreign service officers occupy positions in ambassadors, positions in Washington or Russia or anywhere else. So at that time, when you also get people laterally into lower positions, that will affect the promotion possibilities of our officers. Because all as it is, 17, 18 years you take to become an ambassador. And many other countries, it is much less. If you're a professional foreign service officer, you become a head of mission fairly early in their career. So that was the reason why I was in favor of lateral entry. But there have been very many distinguished ambassadors, like my own ambassador in Washington, Mr. Naresh Chandra. You know, he was maybe many times better than any practicing diplomat, the way he handled the nuclear situation and others. So these are useful, but at a lower level, functionaries of appointing journalists, etc. First of all, they will not lead. They'll say, foreign service on attraction.
Well, it depends
Ambassador.
upon the
They
person
don't lead.
appointed. It depends upon the caliber of the person appointed. Having political appointees as head of mission or ambassador is one issue, but inducting domain expertise laterally when none is available in the foreign service should not be critically viewed, because the process of induction would also require some sort of assimilation and training, so they become part of you. And the
But
reason
it will not be objective considerations. It will not be objective considerations. Like Ambassador Gujarat, he was my ambassador in Moscow, later Prime Minister. He picked up several people from his so-called Saturday club, remember? And posted them to Laos as ambassador. He did a lot of work in Nepal and so on. So I'm not saying that they did not do any useful, but the constitution requires that the foreign service should handle all this at the functional level, because that is why the foreign service was formed, and we are specially trained.
there is no doubt about it. The issue
So
is
that's what I'm saying. So therefore, it should be
India.
diluted. I used to say it should be an elitist service because you are dealing with the world. So you should have the capacity and the ability to move with the world as as an Indian only, and he will not touch meat or he will not be able to have a drink or anything like that. So that kind of training, the flexibility of behavior with the certain understanding that will remain basically an Indian. And all these are to be trained. So if you pick up a professor and send him to be a first secretary or something, he wouldn't have that kind of background, and there will be issues of that kind.
With India's rising international profile, there is a tremendous challenge and need to have our footprint everywhere in this globe. At this point in time, IFS is understaffed. There was a time there were only 600 IFS officers. You cannot cope. Some of the countries remain represented, and you have ambassadors sitting in country taking care of 5 different countries. And that does not help us to project our soft power, hard power, our smart power. If we had some objective mechanism of lateral entry, and keeping in view that the military issues are becoming part of international diplomacy, military diplomacy is part of diplomacy. If
But
there
we have
was
attaches.
yeah, we have attaches, but if we have this kind of induction from armed forces, not just willy-nilly, some sort of objective examination or process of induction, would you have any difficulty having officers from 3 branches of Indian military who are heavily concentrated on international relations and military diplomacy eventually becoming part of the IFS fraternity by a process of assimilation, acculturation, and training?
Well, it could be the other way too. Aren't we occupying positions in the defense ministry? There have been experiments. We have sent some officers to the defense ministry, but it did not work because the system there, to be that system. So each one should be assigned his own job. I mean, I'm talking a tribalistic position because we have to protect the interests of the foreign service and any dilution.
You said it very well, tribalistic instinct. And so I don't have to say
Instincts are
anything because I'm very open-minded,
no,
belonging.
but the most recent debate, but also Dr. Adityanjee, the latest debate on lateral entry turned out to be not acceptable. These joint secretaries' appointments that Prime Minister himself proposed.
I think those
It is now
are political issues, but I have a very specific concern that our footprint is so weak that when we compare with China, we are nowhere internationally. So some mindsets have to be changed. Either we have to increase the induction of number of IFS officers, or we have to make do with certain things temporarily. That's the point.
But with fewer officers, we have done as effectively. So please don't forget that. We, like for example, in Vienna, there are at least 4 important institutions. The bilateral, you have the UN, the atomic energy, there is EU is in Brussels, but OECD. There are so many things. And the United States, I had 5 in Vienna, and I did all the 5 myself. So our range is not that much, but it's very expensive to maintain these missions abroad. And so we have to be economize. And if you take that into account, I think our footprint is not smaller than of the others. In fact, when I was in New York many years ago, somebody did a study, a Canadian institution, and of the effectiveness of diplomats. And they rated us the number 5 in the UN. So number 6, because after the permanent 5, the greatest influence and the greatest footprint was that of India, followed by Pakistan.
I think we have the syndrome of the sixth nation. We have to change the mindset of the syndrome of sixth nation to syndrome of first or second nation. And for that matter, we have to overhaul our thinking, be more open, more broad-minded, and accept help.
No, we have expanded. We have expanded the foreign service a lot since Mr. Modi became Prime Minister. Recruitment was 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Now it is 30, 40, 50. So there is a preparation going on.
Well, it was a pleasure to talk to you, Ambassador Sreenivasan.
You gave us a...
I hope that you will come back to our platform in different capacities. We have other features also besides one-on-one interview. We have monthly distinguished lectures and we have roundtable discussions. So we will invite you in future in those activities. But it was a pleasure to not only talk to you, but discuss your diplomacy liberated and discuss the contemporary value, historical value. So for our viewers, my request is read this book and learn from this, and then try to correlate the things Ambassador Sreenivasan had written at that point in time to the value of that particular topic at this point in time. Needless to say, a lot of his writings have gone unreviewed because they were written over a period of 4 years for National Security Advisory Board. Whatever he wrote for that, that is covered by Official Secrets Act, so that cannot be published. So you are still getting only a part view of his thinking. But thank you very much, sir, for coming to our platform. It was a pleasure indeed.
Thank you very much. Many people compliment me for doing so much after retirement. Most people don't know what I did during the service. They are all hidden away in the archives of the ABE. That is the difference. So thank you very much for this.
And we hope that our younger diplomats follow your example and take lead and inspiration from you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
I appreciate it.
Namaskar.